So next we're going to talk about including information security in the BCP development. Okay, that's where we intersect. I talked about that maybe perhaps information securities are not often being considered as part of BCP, but it should. Okay, and I'll explain why here. So looking back at what BCP is about, the BCP or the plan should be developed and implemented with the purpose of maintaining and restoring operations and making sure the informations are available at the required level and in the required time scale, RTO and RPO, following an interruption, disaster, failure, or uh, of any critical business function. So again, we just reiterating the BCP purpose. So some of the implementation guideline to make sure information security is part of these process, not so much they are at the table, sure they do, but then the BCP team need to consider some of these elements to make sure information securities are also being enforced, included as part of the security requirements. So things like identifying and agreeing on who does what, all the responsibility. I talked about business owner, has to be part of the plan development and so on. It's very critical to identify an acceptable loss of information and services. If we don't go through that exercise, it's meaningless, right? You try to plan for, it's like you blindfolded and try to hit, whenever you want. So you want to be able to know what exactly is the parameter, like RTO and RPO, right? What exactly is the parameter you're planning for? And you want to also implement these procedures to allow recovery and restoration of business operation and availability of information within that time scale. Okay, and you also wanted to pay attention to any assessments of internal and external business dependency. Okay, I talk about the upstream and the downstream. Okay, and if it's external, then contract should be in place. Okay, operational procedures to follow pending completion of recovery and restoration. So that there need to be operational procedures to recover, not only to the point of recovery, RTO, right? Remember, but that there are things that you continue to do. There are still mess that you have to clean up and so on, right? Documentation, it's key for any procedures and processes and an update of procedures and processes. So the process of having an update to the business process is actually a great deal, okay? A big deal. Appropriate education, yeah, it always comes to this part, and my favorite part is that, people is always the weakest link. Yeah, you can have the most sophisticated, you know, um, BCP, but if your people doesn't really understand what they should do, when they should be reacting, how they should be escalating, that's not gonna work. And last but not least is testing and updating your plan. Remember what I said? A BCP plan that is not tested is not a BCP plan at all. Okay, cool. Other things that you needed to kind of consider in the whole process is that to focus on business objective, as I've been talking about all through these course, is that, what are we doing here? Information security. We're not in existing because we want to implement technology. We are in existing because we want to support the business objective. So again, BCP is the same thing. We want to make sure that, proper business functions are being recovered in an acceptable amount of time in order to support the business objective. Okay, identify services and resources required, including staff, uh, IT and non-IT equipments, resources, processes, and so on. So, when we plan, we needed to identify what are the resources, budget, and things that we need in order to support the BCP, the entire BCP development and restoration. Okay, development is only part of that. It's a big part of that, but when there's a critical interruption, you want to be able to actually restore the operation, and you need resources to do that, to support that. Any fallback arrangement, kind of like a plan B, plan C, you want to think about that. You want to, if you need external third-party support, you need to develop agreement. And I just want to talk a little bit about the reciprocal agreements. I mean, in some of the industry, this is acceptable that when I have problems, like competitors. We're talking about, I don't know whether you can talk about direct competitors. I'm not sure, but you can say that if I need help, probably not. Let's say that it's a brother and sister kind of a situation that I'm selling some kind of product, you're selling a related product. You may want to have some friendly company that are of same size of you that have a reciprocal agreement. Is that when I have problems, instead of going to IBM, can I come to you and operate using your conference room, maybe borrow your computer and part of your server and bring our server and so on. It's not unheard of. It is true, but that's something that that some people do, especially in situation in cities in geographical area whereby big city resources like IBM or Microsoft are not readily available to them, maybe 4 or 5 hours away and so on. You think of maybe northern Manitoba and so on, that are areas that are not as easily accessible and not as easily engage these big contingency planning, disaster recovery vendors. Okay, okay. Yeah, BCP should also address any organizational vulnerability and making sure that sensitive informations are appropriately protected. So that's information security. All right. The copy of the BCP plan should be stored apart from your main office because if something bad happened like a fire or something, you don't want the BCP plan to be burned as well, to be destroyed. So you want to store them away. Now you might say, who will actually still maintain things on a non-electronic media? Huh? We're planning for disaster, right? So anything can happen. All your data maybe on your laptop, but you can't get to the building, you can't get to your laptop, or everything is on the cloud and you can't get to the cloud, then you have problems, and so on. I mean, so sometimes it's actually not a bad idea to have a physical copy as a plan that printed and stored somewhere else so you can get to. Okay, and of course these plans is highly sensitive. They have call trees, sensitive number, and sensitive procedure. You want to protect them just like any restricted information. Okay. Okay, so talk a little bit about the framework. The framework, just like any other framework we talked about before, a single framework of business continuity plans should be maintained to make sure all plans are consistent. I talked about at the very beginning that in organizations that are multi-locations and maybe across countries, across the globe, it's actually very important that we had a framework, especially we had maybe perhaps different laws and regulations in different countries to enforce health and safety and so on. So you need to have a framework that will allow that flexibility individually in different country, but also maintain a consistent recovery of time objective or consistent strategies and so on. Okay, so these are some of the implementation guideline, and each plan should have approach for describe the approach for continuity. So you describe some of the background, some of the context, and each plan should also be having an escalation plan, a trigger, when, under what circumstances this call tree should be executed, who should be notified, and so on. Um, in emergency procedures, you want to be able to have evacuation plans, fallback arrangement, and you need to update them as well, okay, if there's any new requirements. Um, And point four, it's good. If you have a change management process in your company, any update to the plan should actually leverage the change management process so that things won't be missed. Things will also always be accurate, and ownership should be always enforced and whatnot. Each plan should have an owner, just like information classification is important because this is for accountability, okay, and also for responsibility of upkeeping the plan. Emergency procedures, talk about that. Fallback plans, resumption plans. The owner should all be responsible for all of them. Okay. Any fallback arrangement or alternate technical services, such as I talk about big vendors like IBM, Microsoft, Dell, and so on, should also be included in terms of your relationship with the service provider. Okay. The conditions of when to activate the plan is actually the most important because and it has to be consistent. It has to be communicated, so people has to know. The key management has to be thoroughly understand when the plan should be executed. Okay, and for any emergency procedures, um, it should also be included in terms of when it should kick in and how it should take into consideration of not jeopardizing business operations. Okay, and of course sometimes it overrides if there's human injuries and so on. I mentioned about that, right? Any fallback procedures describe the actions to be taken to move essential business activities and support services to an alternate location. If there is a health hazard situation like any contagious disease, you don't want to let people into the premises, so you want to have an alternate location to operate. Okay, and you should also have some temporary operation procedures between the time when you can fully recover and so on, and have a process to call for the kick in of that temporary operation procedure and when it should be finished. Okay. A maintenance schedule should be established for testing the plan, reviewing the plan, and normally once a year it's quite acceptable, depending on how volatile is your business and how quickly your business changed, and you may have a more frequent situation. Uh, Awareness, education, and training for all staff, for people that are involved, for people that are not involved, that's key. Okay, for the success of any business continuity planning. People that are responsible should be being mentioned, and there always should be a backup. Like if that person is, your escalation point is on vacation, then you always have an alternate contact. So there's always be two names. Okay. Okay. So at the end, one thing I wanted to add is that we talk about all these are happening at a company, corporations, and enterprise level. But I do actually learn firsthand through some of the situation, and this particular one is the major power outage 2003 of the whole East Coast. Is some personal emergency evacuation plan at home. Not so much we did actually evacuate, but that situation of power failure, what happened was because we don't have power, so we don't have a gas oven, so we don't really have any way to cook. Because there's no power, right? So there was actually lasted more than like a day, almost a day. And so what we have is that we actually have a little portable stove that we actually use to do Chinese hot pot. Okay, and we had that at home, and then we actually use that to cook because they use a little benzene like gas, bucket thing, a little, and then it had fire, so it's like a little gas thing, and we can use that to cook meat and cook some vegetables. So that was interesting. So that triggered me to think that for most of us live in a two-story home, and with only one stairs, and if there's a fire downstairs in the kitchen, which is usually the kitchen's on the ground floor, then when it's burning downstairs, you can't really use the stairs. What is your evacuation plan? You have to think about that. Maybe choose one of the bedrooms and making sure that if you want to jump, the ground is actually all grass or lawn, or maybe you put something there, to soften the landing and so on. And maybe I don't know, putting a ladder on the second floor so that you can use that, and strings or so on like that, right? I mean, you have to think about that. It is a true scenario in emergency. I mean, you can't think about that at the time. You can't wing it. It's too dangerous, and then you kind of not think about that. You can't think about that, right? So that's a personal situation. And I remember somebody was reminding me that if, as a group of friends, you travel, you go to big concerts like things like Woodstock and so on with thousands and thousands of people, then you may want to have a fallback plans too if there's an emergency, which in the US it does happen. Remember in Las Vegas, this is like 2 years ago maybe, that some crazy man was actually on top of the hotel and fire into a concert and kill like 50 people or something like that. This is Las Vegas, okay, in the US, and this is an open air concert. So things like that, you may want to think about that in your mind, that you had an emergency evacuation plan, an emergency response plan, or something like that. Okay. Okay, enough for that, and I'm going to pause. Thank you for listening.